Hi everyone, this is Vishal here, and you're watching the What's Next in Innovation series, wherein we discuss what's happening in the innovation space presently and delve into the future. We have with us Atit Danak, a dear friend of mine from the innovation space. I've kept exchanging notes for the past few years, and really sweet of him to actually accept my invitation for the podcast. So, welcome, Atit.
Hey, thanks, Vishal. Thank you for having me here.
Great. So, a quick overview about Atit. So, Atit is presently heading Zinov CoNext, which is a platform where he helps corporates design, build, and implement their global startup collaboration strategy. So I think we can obviously hear from him more. So I'm just directly jumping into the first question. So I think it would be great if you could kind of give a overview to our listeners about the innovation ecosystem from a corporate's point of view, and obviously giving a quick overview about the internal and external innovation that corporates do. So over to you, Adit.
Got it. Yeah, yeah. I think how we look at this whole piece, Vishal, is that when you are a corporate entity and you want to look at innovation broadly, two buckets, internal and external, right? And when we say internal, this is something uh, talking of innovation, not the stuff that you're doing as part of your roadmap, but beyond that, right? So it's your internal innovation programs, which could be in terms of hackathons, in-house incubators, skunk work teams, venture studios, those kind of pieces. And on the external side, there's always, of course, this long list of things that we can always put, like customers and vendors and sorry, vendors are now called partners. In that sense, startups and academia, which is there. What we have seen is that broadly the two areas where companies end up focusing on the external side, which really works, is the startups and the academia, which is there. And when I say academia from innovation perspective, just to sort of call out, that's very different from companies typically do in terms of giving research grants or going for campus hiring and doing some hackathon or event there. We look at innovations very differently vis-a-vis academia, which is there. So I would say two buckets of importance maybe today: startups and academia
Got
on
it.
the external side.
Got it. So I think the external bit is pretty interesting. So if you can give a overview on how the external works, maybe the
Hmm.
academia, touching about academia, how what kind of academia you would partner with, and what kind of work you would do with them, and the same that also obviously would work with startups. So if you can give a quick overview on that, would be great.
Got it. I think vis-a-vis academia, when we think from an innovation perspective, it's more closer to applied research. Is how I would maybe phrase it, is because what you're really trying to do is you're trying to go after problem statements which have a longer gestation period in terms of solution, and you consequently require a certain environment to go after, right? So think about carbon capturing as an example, or something in, say, aeronautical. You're trying to do something in space. So long gestation periods where you need a certain environment and certain expertise, which is with the academia, is what I would classify there. What I would not classify in that element is core research, which is typically what inevitably leads to a patent but does not go beyond that in terms of monetization. So we call that invention, whereas the applied research is what we say is closer to innovation, something that customers will use. And typically what you find here is those long-term programs that companies try to design. I think industry is still learning how to do it because we are just too anchored on core research, not so much so on applied research, and people are still trying to figure out how to do it. Vis-a-vis startups, I think it's a lot more evolved because what you have is you have two profit-making entities trying to work with each other and trying to figure out something, and it's a classic build by partner kind of a piece. And in that sense, the corporate journey, which started typically with acquisitions, then moved into them realizing that, hey, I don't need to acquire the whole company, I can just acquire a part of the company, which went to setting up the CVCs, right, or equity investments as we call them. From there, they moved on to which is becoming more bread and butter now, which is commercial partnerships. Is to say, okay, how do I create new opportunities with somebody else in the ecosystem? So it could be in terms of increasing the pace of experimentation, or it could be in terms of using someone's technology and reducing time to market for one of your products, or just creating a basket of offerings with somebody in the ecosystem. And all of this I would put into commercial partnerships as a bucket, which is what we are seeing becoming more and more prominent these days.
Got it. So Adit, on the startup bit, right? So we are seeing obviously a lot of large corporates, MNCs, even Indian MNCs in India doing a lot of partnerships with startups. So if you can just
Mhm.
give an overview on what could be the ideal partnership with a startup? Is it going to be a partnership on a vendor development bit or a partner bit? Or is it going to be investments purely, or is it going to be a mix? So generally, what would be the ideal strategy for a corporate to partner with a startup? Is it going to be starting with a maybe with a POC, figure it out, and then go in for a maybe equity investment later on? So if you can just touch upon
Got it.
general journeys of a successful corporate startup partnership.
No, I'm glad you used the word successful, because I think what we have learned with the whole corporate startup ecosystem is that companies don't really look at the key success factors or critical success elements of these partnerships as closely. There is this tendency to say, let's fail fast. We're going to work with startups, so let's just do it. We have action bias, which is great. But I think what is fundamentally important is while you have bias for action and you adhere to fail fast philosophy, idea is not to fail, and there is merit in terms of thinking things through, breaking them, and then executing on that. That being said, I think how I would maybe sort of classify all these activities is from two or three lenses for a corporate, right? One we know is that you have all the options, right, built by partner, which is there, but each one of them come with a different degree of freedom and different degree of risk,
Exactly.
and as a partner you're trying to balance it out.
Right.
So the thumb rule for me is quite simple. I would say that, look, if you are going to put $1 billion available for acquisition of a company, then just take 10%, have $100 million available for investments. Take 10% of that, put $10 million for partnerships. The beautiful thing is this, that what you can do in terms of $10 million as part of your POC budget, or in terms of collaboration partnerships, is it increases the number of experiments you're working on, and it also increases the number of companies you can work with, right? So it
True.
gives a certain pace to you.
Exactly.
And if you're able to do it, then fundamentally your $100 million that you want to invest becomes less, risky. Because and similarly, if you want to do acquisition, it becomes even lesser risky, right? So you are in a way entering early on in terms of the innovation journey of a startup. You're trying to work with them. You're trying to capture, say, extrinsic value from that partnership, which is impacting your P&L. If it's really good, then you start capturing more and more intrinsic value, right? As Warren Buffett calls about intrinsic and extrinsic. So equity investments acquisition, you're trying to capture the intrinsic value of a particular company, which is
True.
there. Now, within the whole piece, what we have seen is that there are enough playbooks for acquisitions and equity investments. I think equity investments corporates are still figuring it out. There is some time to go in terms of people really sort of seeing that this is how we do it. Like M&A is so sorted right now.
Got it.
I
Yep.
think it's
True.
even a lot more earlier when it comes to commercial partnerships. So to your point, in terms of thinking about these partnerships or different ways, I would take a approach of how much do I need to invest at each of these mechanisms, how does my risk profile really change. But overall what we are seeing is that companies are realizing more and more that you cannot use only one approach to work with startups. You need a sequence of approaches, and you need to create a stack of capabilities within the organization, so that anybody out there who can potentially give value to you, you're able to capture it, which is there. So that's a good way to, I think, to think about these partnerships.
Got it. So I think an ideal way, it might be one of the ways on, as I mentioned, that maybe they could start with a POC kind of, or maybe an accelerator program of an open innovation program. Start with that bit, maybe for a 6 months or 8 months period, where you kind of date the startup, and then you figure out how they work, how they function, how strong is the team, how scalable the solution is, and then maybe go in for maybe a pilot or maybe a slightly bigger contract, and then look at a later stage, maybe at an equity or an M&A. So do you think this could be an ideal way for a corporate to manage their risks and at the same time have a successful corporate startup
Yeah,
partnership looking at a
I
long-term
think
horizon?
yeah, I think eventually yes, Vishal. But the thing is, there is always that speed gap which is there. So what you will see is, like, what I would recommend to a company is you start at a point where you're most comfortable with. So
True.
if you're more, it's easier for you to do equity investments, then go for it. Start with that particular part.
Got it.
But of course, be smart about it, because the corporate has the advantage of doing something with the company, realizing the synergy before making an investment. If you see a VC have to first put in the money and then try to give value to the startup and
True.
protect their investment, right? So
True.
everything they do post investment is insurance that this should grow.
True.
Whereas for a corporate, it's a different scenario. You can try things out before. It's like going to a ice cream parlor and trying out different ice creams and then seeing that this is one which really makes sense for me. Of course, we're talking about people and organizations here, so maybe that ice cream analogy doesn't really work. No offense meant there. But yes, so I would maybe solve for it accordingly, which is there. Now coming to your point, this aspect that you spoke about, the POC, the pilot, work with them for some time. I think yes, conceptually that's how I would say a company should definitely look at in terms of commercial partnerships. Think of it as three different capabilities: commercial partnerships, investments, acquisitions. You build each one independently, but they are interlinked. So you get to derive more and more value, reduce more and more risk. When it comes to commercial partnerships, I think the fundamental thing to keep in mind for a corporate is to sort of think of startups as a customer, right, and then design processes accordingly, right. So there is that time element, right. You cannot date for too long, right? Otherwise, I think it's how they talk about in the Indian family, right? When it's arranged marriage, they say, okay, after a certain time you have to get married,
True.
right? Or you have to say yes or no. It's something similar, right? There are sentiments, emotions, things involved.
Yeah,
So there needs to
exactly.
be certain method to the madness. Yeah.
Got it. No, that's an interesting thought there, right? So I think, as you mentioned, I think for a corporate, maybe to start off with a maybe collaboration with startup, if they ideally, I think you should have a accelerator or an open innovation team along with an
Correct.
M&A equity team, so that each
Correct.
team can be kind of interlinked, right? So if you get some interesting startup that could be a direct equity investment, I think it's a value add for the company. At the same time, you have your open innovation accelerator program also running. So I think that's a pretty interesting way to look into it. So I think maybe following up with that, what do you think could be from both, right, from corporate's point of view and startup point of view, the mindset? Because generally, what we have seen is corporates have a different DNA, different culture, different thought process. So while corporates and startups partner, what could be the ideal one or two, maybe one, two, maybe 3 points on how a corporate should think about it and how a startup should think about it, assuming we're going in for a commercial partnership.
Right. I think I can talk for hours on this. But I think what becomes for important for any partnership or any collaboration, right? Let's take an example of two equal companies coming together, right? What they would be solving for is trust and respect, right? Are you able to trust the other person? Do you respect what they say? And a lot of fundamentals come into that particular being.
True.
And I think it's same thing which is very, very important between a corporate and a startup. I think it's important for both of them to have that trust and respect. It has to be solved for. It's not about big boy, small boy. It's not about,
That's important.
I'm bigger, you're smaller, or it's not about I'm faster, you are slower, from a startup being a
Yeah.
faster and
I
corporate
think,
being a
yeah, I
slower.
think so basically equal partners looking at eye to eye,
Equal
right?
partners. Looking at eye to eye, being able to sort of focus on the problem, not what I can get necessarily out of you, right? So what happens is then the idea of that partnership is that together we can garner something much more bigger,
Yeah,
right? It's not
absolutely.
just
Yeah.
about what I can take from you or what you can take from me. I
True.
think that's the fundamental of it, which is there. And I think the last piece I would maybe say, if I had to keep it like really, really short, I would say, um, in a corporate, the classic problem a person ends up facing is that nine people will say yes, one person will say no, and the project is shelved,
True.
right? So I think the innovation team also requires equal rigor and persistence that an entrepreneur has in terms of
True.
making things possible. And if the team has that kind of attitude, then what will do they do is they'll focus not only on the problem, but they'll focus on how to make the solution work, right?
True.
And you get to be creative. You have to be creative, right? You can't just say that this is the process I'll follow. You have to work around things, right? So I think that's the second part. So trust
Got
and
it.
respect is the first point, and second is be creative, have equal amount of persistence, and that commitment to make it work. What
Got it.
happens later, nobody knows, but it's required. You can't go, half baked into the game.
No, makes sense, Adit. So I think trust and respect, equal relationship, equal partnership. I think that's pretty important. I think the second bit that you mentioned, generally the innovation teams in these large corporates become like your internal business development teams, right, for the startup.
Hmm.
So if that is the mindset, I think you're right. I think generally you kind of represent the entrepreneur in your company and you present those solutions for those problems. So I
Yeah,
think,
because I think when you want to make a change, you have to sell. You have to constantly keep selling, right?
yeah,
Look at any
absolutely,
change maker of any kind.
exactly.
They are great salespeople. So it's something
Sales and
similar with innovation team.
true
Yeah,
sales and influencing. I think influencing is also
absolutely.
another.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's kind of goes hand in hand. No, that's I think pretty critical. I think those 2 points I think kind of nail it. I think so. Startup founders out there, I think if you're listening to this, I think you should definitely look into this. And obviously, corporates out there, I think keeping it very simple, keeping it um, focusing on the problem, focusing on innovative solutions is the key. I think
I think there's one big policy in the corporate world, right? Is that startups don't have processes, and you have to break the processes. I think it's not so much about breaking the process. It's about having the right process, right?
true,
So what's the difference between startup and a corporate? Startup is a company trying to find repeatable, replicable, scalable processes,
true,
right? That's the only difference. This one is
yeah,
discovering, that one has found it. But I think what companies or people end up forgetting is that process is not a problem. Absence of one or wrong process is the problem. So it's not about breaking things, it's about creating better solutions, which is
true.
there. So if you have to persist, make the change, it's to improve, not just to break it for the heck of it.
No, true, I agree. And I think startups can learn from corporates in terms of creating those processes. I think
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
these relationships, both learn from each other, right? I think corporates learn to be agile, swift, come to, I mean, decision making power to be much faster than, corporates. I think corporates can learn all these uh, things that make a startup a startup. And similarly, a startup can learn all the other things from a corporate. So I think in my head, I think it's a synergistic relationship where both can benefit if it's done well. So
Correct.
that's my view.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. So the last, I think maybe to touch upon what could the future look like, right? So in terms of I'm still sticking to the corporate startup relationship. How can
Hmm.
these two entities coexist well, um, grow grow each other in a sense, work towards each other. I mean, work towards making it happen, grow together, and make it a successful kind of a cycle for both. Like corporate gets to work with startup, startup gets to work with corporate. You get business, startup gets business from corporate, and maybe at the later stage, equity and M&A opportunity, and the cycle kind of continues. So maybe couple of 2 or 3 views you think that how the future would lay for the corporate startup relationship.
Yeah, so I'll maybe we shall answer this question in two, three parts, right? Which is there. So I think the first part is, I think the collaboration intensity is going to increase. More and more corporates are going to be working with startups, and startups are going to be selling into corporates. That's going to happen for sure. And the fundamental reason is that we will constantly be working in a more and more rapid environment, more resource constrained environment. You will not always have all the talent that you require. You will not always have all the financial resources you would require.
True.
So it just makes sense to collaborate. I think the evidence for this would be, someone like say Flipkart, which has now a startup innovation program, right? And it was, it just got acquired recently as a firm, and they
True.
do acquisitions and they do investments also, right? So it's not a 100-year-old company.
Yeah,
It's
amazing
much younger
story.
company working with startups, right? Same with
Absolutely.
say Freshworks and so many other unicorns in India and overall. The second part is, I think, what will happen is that this whole element of partnerships is something for the first time in the world, in maybe in human history. We are trying to figure out how to make them work at scale. So think of what happened to HR in the 40s, 50s, and 70s. Initially, people were seen as resources, and then they said, no, these are not resources; these are humans. So you have to look at them very, very differently. But there was a complete function created in terms of how to help people succeed, how to do it better. So what was the line manager duty became a functional duty also, right?
True.
Similarly, I would say, it's something going to happen with collaboration, because people will realize that this is not something you can do over emails alone, or just by, doing some data gathering. It's very relationship driven. It's people driven. It requires a certain skill set. And what's going to happen is something similar will happen. More and more processes will come, more literature will happen. There's already increasing research in academia in terms of how to make these collaborations work. So I think we'll see it become mainstream, like a proper function, for companies to really build on. There'll be more consultants like me trying to teach people how to do it, which is there, right? So it's going to increase on that front. I think the third part is in terms of how we do it, what we do, I think we'll continue to see, a good part of evolution happen. Then tactics will keep on changing, right? So one, it's going to increase. Second, it's going to become a core function. Then third is the evolution in terms of how people will keep on looking at changing of different tactics, because you need to outcompete your peers in terms of if they're also adopting the same techniques, right? So you have to change something which is there. So that evolution will start to happen in that particular sense. I think fundamentally what we will see across all the three things to happen is how we look at risk, how we think about freedom, how we think about innovation. Those are the pieces which are going to change, essentially. So I think a lot of, to draw a parallel here, a lot of elements that we talk about investing in stock markets, where we say it's about emotions, not just about technicals, which makes a good, trader versus, an average trader. It's something similar with innovation also. You can have all the data points in the world, but what you're really doing is you are trying to train yourself emotionally to take a certain kind of a risk, to be able to work with lesser amount of data. So that's where I think the human skill set will start to improve. That's where a bulk of, evolution will really happen. That's what's going to fundamentally change how we think about risk, how we think about freedom, how we, look at trust, respect, those meta elements which are there. Slightly philosophical, but I think it's also very, very central for innovation.
No, no, true, Adit. I think these basic principles, basic values, I think will still exist. I think you rightly pointed out. I think looking at how it's going, corporates are and would be dependent on startups in terms of, as you said, right, resources crunch and talent crunch. I think startups would definitely fill the gap. And I mean, if you ask me, I think the future is bright. I mean, obviously, startups out there, B2B startups, I think you should definitely um, figure out ways to collaborate with corporates at the earliest. Innovation, through the innovation team is one of the ways you can kind of collaborate with companies. Obviously, otherwise, you can directly reach out to the respective teams to which your solution kind of provides value, right? So I think going further, Atit, I think as you said, the collaboration will get bigger. You're going to see a lot of startups become large companies as well in the process as well,
Yeah.
right? So and the way it's going right now, the B2B SaaS, especially in India, is buzzing. And I think there have been reports wherein their expected potential valuation of B2B SaaS in India is going to be around $1 trillion. So looking at all
Yeah, I
that, I
think
think,
there's a lot of value creation for sure, which is
yeah,
happening.
yeah,
And I think how we look at value, how we capture value is going to be interesting for sure.
no, true. And what I'm also seeing is a lot of these senior folks leaving large corporates and starting out their startups, right? And serving clients globally. So I think that trend in India looks very interesting, very promising. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think as a country, you're fairly export oriented any which ways,
Yeah, true.
right? As people. So until now we're exporting people, now we're exporting products is how I would say, right?
Yeah,
So I think it's going to happen. The other part is the good thing is this is that in a lot of domains, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to have a certain amount of time spent in that industry to have experience where the
true,
real problem and the opportunity is. And that's the one of the core reasons if you see in terms of track record of any successful B2B or B2C founder who's come out of a corporate and is working that field, you will see they have come out and they've understood the system, and as they're deploying the solution, they are working the system also in
true.
terms of how to really make it happen, right? And I think that's a unique advantage, right? It gives you advantage which many times as a fresh in the industry you will not have, right? And if you see what the freshers are working on, there are two things you will notice very, very clearly. It's not as if they're not working on cutting edge problems, they are. But if you dig a bit more deeper, you will realize that those founders are working on that problem or similar problem for 2, 3, 4 years before they launch this particular startup.
Yeah,
So they already have a
exactly.
domain technology experience. It's not,
True.
they're not starting from zero. They've compounded a lot of that knowledge, right? And that's the same thing for the corporate folks coming out and working on things. The other part is, I think, as an ecosystem, as a society, we definitely see entrepreneurship as a good, viable career option, right, for
Exactly.
people to try. I think that's
Exactly.
been a big shift. It's not easy for everybody to jump into it. It's not, it's more difficult than everybody assumes, but it's not like before. It's okay to sort of be in most families where they are secure.
True.
They don't mind kids, not really bringing in, big paychecks,
Yeah.
and then sort of, getting something home later on. I think they understand the risk and the reward. So I
Yeah, no,
think that's the most
absolutely.
exciting.
No, and
Yeah,
also obviously compounds, right? With successful startups, you get the entire ecosystem being built and you get a lot of
absolutely.
maturity in the ecosystem. And then that gives confidence to kind of parents saying that, hey kid, you can go ahead and build your own business. So I think that cycle, once that develops and once you see great success stories from India through these startups, I think startups will definitely, I mean, I think now it's become mainstream. I'm seeing so many people kind of leaving corporates and joining startup opportunities, right? It's much more
It also pays well, by the way, right now. I think startups also pay much better than corporates.
true. That's
That's another
another
thing.
angle to it. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Great. So I think maybe last but not the least, I thought maybe just want to touch upon your experience at Zenov Conex. I think you've been leading the Conex practice. Just wanted to, if you could share some light on the skills required to be in this ecosystem, right? In the startup slash innovation ecosystem.
I think what we do at Zenoko next is fundamentally we are building something, right? So we shall think of it this way, that a company is trying to figure out this whole commercial partnerships, and they want to build a program for it. But the keyword is build a program, right?
Hmm.
And for that program to really succeed, you have to build the partnerships.
True.
And for that partnership to really succeed, you have to build the startup. So I think what core skill set we need, or we end up gaining from Konix, is how to build. And when you think about how to build, is where you start realizing that it's about curiosity. People have to be looking out for
True.
problems and solutions. If you're not curious, you'll never figure out what the problem is or what the solution is.
Exactly.
uh, but knowing alone is not enough. You have to take initiative. So you want to go after solving that particular problem, right? You just
All right.
can't be sitting in your chair and thinking, boss told me yes, boss told me no. ठीक है, get in the action. But if you've started something and you don't finish it, then there's no point. So we look for solid follow through. So for us, curiosity, initiative, follow through is what we would go for fundamentally, which is a lot on the attitude side. Not something you can really teach people. You can help them refine it. The other pieces, because we are consultants in terms of how to work on Excel or PowerPoint or Tableau, or do Python or R for data analysis, I think
Got it.
those things can be taught. But what we look for is those attributes of curiosity, initiative, and follow through, which is there. I think that sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? In terms of, as an innovation person, you also need that persistence, that resilience, equal to a founder, to make things happen. So yeah, we are always looking for good people, and fingers crossed we'll keep doing well in the business, and always keep looking for more and more such people. But it's definitely a
Amen.
good bunch of folks to work with. Yeah.
Really connected the mindset of a innovation specialist and a founder. I think there's a lot of similarities, right? I think from
Absolutely.
curiosity,
Yeah.
building, right? I mean, looking at problems in a different way, looking at solutions in a different way. So I think one bit on your fundamental behavior, like curiosity, drive, and follow through. That is one bit. I think on the technical bit, I think, as you said, is more trainable. I think if you get the fundamentals
Absolutely. Yeah.
right, I think makes sense. Atit, I think it's been a fun chat. I think I got to learn quite a bit, though I've been in the ecosystem as well. It's always good to exchange notes. Satyajit, thanks a lot once again to be part of this podcast. So for folks who want to reach out to Atit, I will be sharing his information, his contacts in the description. So you can reach out to him for anything you need. Cheers. Bye.
And please do reach out, people. Thanks, Vishal. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks. Thanks, Atit.